WDR, promoting dialogue.
It's midday in Dakar, 1 p.m. in Lagos. Good afternoon and welcome to Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and around the world at WDR.org. First, our top stories. West African rights groups reject junta's new election date in Guinea-Bissau. Benin Opposition Democrats Party refuses to challenge legislative election results as one-party parliament takes shape.
The party has decided not to appeal, to say that what's been done is the Machiavellian plan that was conceived long ago to exclude us.
A migrant boat forcefully returns to the Gambia with over 100 aboard after engine failure at rough seas. And Ghanaian President Mahama urges United African Front and youth skills investment at World Economic Forum.
We need a generation of young Africans who can build and not just consume. Second, we must build together. No African country can industrialize alone by itself.
Please stay with us for details of these stories and more.
On the news, this is Sankulu Jibril Janko.
Many thanks for joining us this afternoon. Newslink begins with a focus on Guinea-Bissau, while West African human rights organizations are rejecting a newly announced date for general elections. The ruling military junta has scheduled the presidential and legislative elections for December 6, 2026. However, human rights groups are urging the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, to maintain pressure on the junta for a swift return to constitutional order. They expressed these demands in a joint statement released on Thursday. Christopher Aticho explains the details.
The signatory organizations of this statement include the Popular Front of Guinea-Bissau, Africtivist and the Africa Jom Center of Senegal, along with the West African Democracy Solidarity Network, Wadr. They are challenging ECOWAS for failing to implement the conclusions reached at its December 2025 summit regarding the political crisis in Guinea-Bissau. These organizations oppose the holding of a new elections on December 6 and demand the publication of results from the election held on November 23, 2025. They remind ECOWAS that political actors arrested following the coup remain in detention under inhumane conditions. Additionally, the human rights groups note an increase in arbitrary detentions and acts of intimidations targeting citizens, political leaders, human rights activists, and journalists. They further demand the immediate and unconditional release of all detainees. Meanwhile, the West African human rights organizations call on ECOWAS to urgently impose individual and collective sanctions against the citizens and military perpetrators of the November 2025 coup.
Christopher Aticho filed that report. In Benin, the Constitutional Court officially announced the final results of the legislative elections held on January 11, 2026. This decision, made public on January 19, signifies the conclusion of the vote validation process by the highest electoral authority. However, this formal announcement does not entirely close the matter, as the organic law allows for a 10-day period to contest the results. Despite this opportunity, the main opposition party, the Democrats, has chosen not to file any appeals against the electoral outcome. Abdullah Hassan tells us more.
The main opposition party, the Democrats, claims that filing an appeal with the Constitutional Court is pointless. It accuses the country's highest court of validating the results of the Electoral Commission, which it argues do not accurately reflect the true outcome of the vote. Moise Monchoy is the spokesperson for the Democrats Party.
The party has decided not to appeal. Not appealing because it's a sign of failure. No, it's a political message. A clear and unequivocal message we are sending to public opinion to say that what's been done is unjust. What's been done is the Machiavellian plan that was conceived long ago to exclude us. The president has chosen what he has opted for, that there be no opposition at all in Benin. Why would we now file appeals? waste our money for a result that's already compromised. That's why the party has decided not to appeal at this stage.
Additionally, members of the opposition party who will not participate in the presidential election scheduled for April are planning to regroup and reorganize. Moncho emphasized the intention.
We are obliged to acknowledge this and look to the future. The Democrats Party's priority is to restructure the party and to prepare it to lead political life for the next 7 years. But we remain fairly confident that this constitutional decision, despite its unique and exclusive nature, will not be beneficial for the incoming president. It will be too much of a burden for him to begin his first term with a single-party parliament and without any dissenting voices.
As was the case in 2019, the Beninese parliament will again be dominated by a single party. Only the deputies from the two parties that form the majority will occupy the seats, having won all 102 seats in the recent parliamentary elections.
A report from our correspondent in Cotonou, Aziz Adam Sile, presented by Abdullahi Hassan. Ghana's President John Dramani Mahama is calling on African countries to negotiate as one in their engagement with the global economy. He places strong emphasis on investing in skills, particularly for young people. Speaking at the Davos convening of the Africa Accra Reset Initiative, President Mahama warns that Africa's fragmented approach to talks on minerals, trade and climate finance weakens the continent's bargaining power. The Ghanaian leader says building digital, green energy and manufacturing skills among the youth is critical to securing Africa's future in an increasingly competitive global landscape.
What if we pooled our negotiating power on critical minerals so we capture value and not just extract raw ore? What if we exercise more sovereignty over our natural resources to create prosperity for our own people? What if we build regional manufacturing hubs that create millions of jobs for our young people? What if we produce our own vaccines and our own medicines with our own technology? This is the Accra Reset vision. It's not a talk shop. It's not a declaration. It's a practical blueprint for how countries can work together to build real sovereignty. In this fast-changing world, we're entering an era where countries must compete, innovate, and build or be left behind. Our young people are watching, they're brilliant, they're hungry, and they're running out of patience. So here's what we must focus on. First, we must invest in skills, not just education, but skills that match real jobs in the real economy. We need a generation of young Africans who can build and not just consume. Second, we must build together. No African country can industrialize alone by itself. We must create regional prosperity platforms, manufacturing zones, energy grids, and digital infrastructure that gives our businesses skill and our workers opportunity. Third, we must negotiate as one. When we bargain separately, we're weak. When we negotiate together on minerals, trade, and climate finance, we can be formidable.
Ghanaian President John Dramani Mahama. Still in Ghana, 5 candidates vying for the opposition New Patriotic Party's presidential nomination have signed a peace agreement. This pact, signed on Thursday, emphasizes their commitment to maintaining calm, unity and transparency throughout the party's election process, which is scheduled for January 31, 2026. As part of the agreement, the candidates pledge to support the individual who becomes the party's flag bearer for the upcoming 2028 general elections and to work towards securing a strong parliamentary majority. From Accra, Nadi Ditete reports.
The agreement, signed at the Alisa Hotel in Accra, seeks to prevent tensions and promote unity ahead of the party's presidential contest scheduled for January 31st, 2026. Addressing the gathering, former President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo reminded party faithful that the NPP must remain united regardless of the outcome.
The NPP is bigger than any individual. No ambition, grievance, or faction is greater than the other. Leadership contests must never weaken the collective cause. Unity is not optional. Unity is a strategic necessity for victory. So I charge all of you, this peace pact must not only be signed, it must be lived.
Chairman of the party's elections committee, Joseph Oseiwusu, also urged all aspirants to accept the results and rally behind whoever emerges victorious. Meanwhile, the NPP General Secretary, Justin Frimpong Kodia, said unity after the primaries would be crucial to the party's fortunes in the 2028 general elections.
And therefore, let us not see that this is just a fair contest. This is a contest of just how to show that have the support in the party. Whether you have the support or not, when you win January 31st, we will still need our brothers to carry on for us to win the elections in 2028. And I can assure you, every support that we need, and even after the elections, the process of reconciliation to bring everybody on board, that we are fully prepared to support you, that we rally ourselves together to fight for the victory in 2020.
Several party leaders and state officials witnessed the signing ceremony, including Minority Leader Alexander Penyomarking, Chairman of the Council of Elders Hackman Obusuwacheman, Inspector General of Police Christian Tata Yohuno, and former Chief of Staff Akosia Frema Osei Opare. The 5 aspirants in the race are former Vice President Dr. Mahmoud Balmia, Kennedy Japon, Dr. Brian Champong, Dr. Yawose Duchum, and Engineer Kwabna Ijipong. For WDR, Nadidi Tete, Accra.
More stories coming up on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
In Guinea, the transitional government submitted its resignation to President Mahamadou Doumbouya on Thursday. This decision comes just days after Doumbia's inauguration as the elected president for a 7-year term. Upon receiving the resignation, the Guinean leader of state promised to sign a decree in February for legislative and senatorial elections. For more of this development, let's join Imo Edet.
The resignation of the government led by Amadou Uriba was expected the day after the inauguration of President-elect General Mahamadou Doumbouya. However, it occurred on Thursday following an extraordinary cabinet meeting. This was announced by General Amara Kamara, Minister Secretary General of the Presidency.
The head of state accepted the resignation of the government submitted to him by the Prime Minister. He indicated that in accordance with the Republic custom, this resignation allows for a fresh start after the presidential election of December 28, 2025, which took place peacefully and in a festive atmosphere.
After receiving the government's resignation, General Mahamadou Doumbouya entrusted former Prime Minister Amadou Riba with the mission of revitalizing and establishing the GMD. It is an independent political movement that brought Doumbouya to power. General Amara Kamara says this initiative is part of the preparations for the legislative elections scheduled for the coming month.
The President of the Republic has entrusted Mr. Amadou Uriba with the mission of developing the political movement, the Generation for Modernity and Development GMD, in preparation for the upcoming elections, particularly the legislative elections. The head of state announced that starting next month, he will set the date for the next election in accordance with Article 74 of the Electoral Code.
Pending the appointment of a new Prime Minister who will form a new government, the Secretaries General of the various ministerial departments have been tasked with handling the day-to-day affairs of the cabinet.
A report from Cherno Ibrahim Balde in Conakry, voiced by Imo Edet. Away from politics, a boat carrying 164 migrants forcefully returned to the shores of the Gambia after its attempt to reach Europe was halted due to engine failure and bad weather conditions. The vessel, which left Fonyi Berford in West Coast region last week, eventually made landfall near Bakau in the Kanfing municipality. This unsuccessful journey once again highlights the dangers faced by migrants trying to reach Europe through irregular routes. WDR's Banjul correspondent Sangdonan Mendy reports.
The boat carrying 164 people, including 14 women and 2 children, returned safely after developing engine problems amid rough seas. The vessel departed Fonyi Brefet on January 18 and later made landfall near Bakau in the Kanafing municipality. According to migrant rights activist Ibrahim Adrame, the returnees were exhausted and hungry. He added that 2 passengers were reportedly ill, while 1 person was facing mental health challenges.
Among these 164 people, 160 are all Gambians, 3 Senegalese. We believe that those 3 Senegalese are the captain of the boat, one Nigerian man. Other people I meet, they don't have money. I told them I'm not using shoe. I buy a shoe for like 10 or 15 people. I told give slippers the payment and try to buy some food stuff for others. And I even drove some people to Turntable, to Airport Junction, those who are going around. So, but before that, I already communicated with the Gambia Red Cross. I tell them this is what is happening, and I called the SIS. I called the immigration also to report the matter for them. Though. But as I'm speaking, everyone has returned back back to their home. So, but the 3 Senegalese and the Nigerian, I don't know their condition at this moment.
In a related development, immigration officials in the North Bank region have identified a new suspected departure point at Jurunku in Opanyomi. This disclosure follows intelligence reports of suspicious migration movements. Authorities say smugglers are increasingly using isolated water bodies to evade law enforcement, prompting intensified patrols in the area. Official figures indicate that more than 2,700 people were intercepted in 2025 while attempting to migrate through irregular routes. For Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, I am Sangdona Mendy, reporting from Banjul.
You're listening to Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio 94.9 FM and online at wadr.org. Here is a reminder of our top stories. West African rights groups reject junta's new election date in Guinea-Bissau. Benin Opposition Democrats Party refuses to challenge legislative election results as one-party parliament takes a save. A migrant boat forcefully returns to Gambia with over 100 aboard after engine failure at rough seas. And away from the sub-region, 30 opposition supporters killed in post-election violence in Uganda. Still ahead, we have guest interview and sports news. Please stay with us.
Fresh and breaking news all the time. Hear it first as the news breaks, only on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
In Liberia, the government's reliance on volunteer health workers and teachers is threatening the country's ability to deliver essential public services. The situation is causing widespread dissatisfaction and threatens the collapse of critical sectors. Years of neglect have resulted in a crisis that is drawing the attention of the national legislature, prompting calls for government's immediate intervention. WDR's Morovia correspondent Abraham Packer reports.
Some members of the National Legislature, including Magibi County Senator Emmanuel Nukwe, are raising significant concerns in the Senate. They emphasize that Liberia's reliance on voluntary health workers and teachers is undermining essential public services and weakening worker morale across the country. Senator Nukwe points out that the trained professionals are performing full-time duties without a formal employment, regular pay, or job security, despite their crucial role in national development. In response to a formal communication from Maryland County District 2 Representative Anthony Williams, the House of Representatives voted to summon the officials of the Ministries of Education, Health, Finance, and the Civil Service Agency.
District by district, and how much those health workers are making. We want to know. As well as the volunteer teachers again. Teachers are all in the street. We get a lot of money in the budget. Then at the end of the year, the Ministry of Education cannot furnish us with a comprehensive data.
Following a motion to invite relevant authorities, Representative Mark Dury, the chairman of the House's Committee on Ways, Means and Finance, acknowledged a budget allocation made in the past and questioned why the affected individuals were not included.
There was about $1 million that was allocated for volunteers. These issues were brought up, and the minister again said he has nothing.
Volunteer teachers and health workers nationwide continue to face multiple challenges, including irregular salaries, lack of insurance coverage, and limited access to other employment benefits. Lawmakers state that this initiative aims to hold the ministries accountable and ensure that the workforce, crucial to Liberia's education and health sectors, is adequately supported and formally recognized. For Newslink on WADR, Abraham Packer, Monrovia.
The European Union has announced new humanitarian funding for Nigeria and other African countries as part of its 2026 budget. This support, totaling €550 million, aims to address urgent needs, especially in conflict-affected regions of Nigeria. From Abuja, WADR's correspondent Yachenu Sasetu reports.
This funding is part of the European Union's overall humanitarian allocation of €1.9 billion for 2026. According to a statement released on Wednesday by the EU delegation to Nigeria and ECOWAS, a significant portion of this support will focus on Nigeria's northwest region, where humanitarian needs are particularly high. EU Commissioner for Equality, Preparedness and Crisis Management, Hadja Labib, made this announcement at the ongoing World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. Labib emphasized that the global humanitarian system is facing increasing pressures, noting that public funding alone is no longer enough to address the scale of current crisis. She stated that Europe is stepping up by committing an initial 1.9 billion euros for humanitarian assistance in 2026, calling this move a test of global solidarity. The EU Commissioner also revealed her efforts to engage the private sector at the Davos Forum to mobilize additional financing and innovative solutions to complement public funding and extend support to more people in need. The European Union continues to be one of the world's largest humanitarian donors, assisting vulnerable populations affected by conflicts, displacement, and climate-related challenges. For WADR, Hichinisasitu reporting.
Well, news beyond West Africa. Uganda's army chief and son of newly re-elected President Yoweri Museveni said Friday that 30 opposition supporters had been killed in the wake of the post-election violence. Army Chief Muhoozi Kainerugaba, who wrote on X that 2,000 detained hooligans have been arrested. Recall, Yoweri Museveni, 81, won a 7th term in office with 72% of the vote, according to the Electoral Commission. Since then, opposition leader Bobi Wine and a candidate in the vote who secured 25% described the election as a blatant theft and called for protest. As of Friday, Wine remained in hiding after accusing security forces raided his home. African observers and international NGOs have criticized the heavy repression of the opposition and an internet shutdown.
Politics,
analysis on major news,
social matters, and all. This is The Guest.
The Guest interview segment focuses on Guinea-Bissau, where West African human rights organizations are rejecting a newly announced date for general elections. The ruling military junta has scheduled the presidential and legislative elections for December 6, 2026. However, human rights organizations in West Africa are urging ECOWAS to maintain pressure on the junta for a swift return to constitutional order. One of these rights groups is the West Africa Democracy Solidarity Network, WADEMOS. Our guest is Austin Abe, WADEMOS liaison officer at ECOWAS. He explains the details of the joint statement.
First, let's deconstruct what is happening in Guinea-Bissau. Elections were going on fantastically. Voters are turned out to vote. Suddenly, a city president began to call international media that he had been disposed, that a coup had happened, and he was the one who announced his own coup. And everybody sat back, and ECOWAS could be contented with that kind of narrative. So that is why WADEMOS is not comfortable with the December 6th, 2026 date for another election. And as President Jonathan has stated, announced the November 2025 elections, because the election was already concluded. It was only collation. The people of Guinea-Bissau have decided ECOWAS and the AU should ensure the formal announcement of that result. We must not allow the military to dictate as of this time.
Your organization, WADEMOS, is among several West African human rights organizations rejecting the December 6, 2026 election date announced by the Guinea-Bissau's military leadership. What risks do you see in holding new elections?
Because juntas cannot be trusted. If you recall, in Mali, we were supposed to have had an election at least in the last 2 years. In Guinea-Conakry, election had taken place at least a year when the election had took place in December 28, 2025. The military leaders, once they consolidate their feet on the ground, they began to extend the date. So once this military junta in Guinea-Bissau begin to consolidate themselves, they will crack down on dissent voice, push them out of the country the way we have seen in recent time. So this is a playbook. And ECOWAS should not allow this to fly. This is a test for ECOWAS in 2026 to take action.
Do you think the military leaders will organize these elections without contesting as candidates?
These military leaders haven't learned from what has happened in Conakry. There's a tendency to also organize themselves, having consolidated power to contest election, and they put themselves on the ballot. By this time, there will be no opposition standing. We have seen that. We saw that in Guinea-Conakry in the election of December. There was no opposition. We have seen that in Benin. Benin just had an election, a legislative election, where the present party, Patrick Talon, has won all of the seats. We have seen that in Côte d'Ivoire. So it's a pattern. Dismantle the opposition. And you'll be the only one that will remain that has the resources, that has the state capture, that has everything. That is a playbook. And ECOWAS must understand this playbook and not allow it to fly.
The joint statement calls on ECOWAS to impose individual and collective sanctions against those responsible for the November 2025 coup. What kind of sanctions would be most effective, and how realistic is their implementation by ECOWAS?
Sanctions need to be imposed on people, on these individuals. We mention them by name. The US does that. They have a list where sanctions, once you get out of the country for any reason, you'll be arrested. So can we utilize that mechanism? Some kind of soft kinetic approach to deal with it without placing sanctions that will have impact on the citizens. Because if we place economic sanctions, it may not be too well for the people. And that is why support to ECOWAS, particularly around that Niger invasion, did not work. I think we need sanctions that will be targeted at these individuals by way of focusing on them by name. So that means that ECOWAS need to do more of diplomatic sanctions rather than sanctions that impact on the people. But overall, ECOWAS does have an opportunity with Guinea-Bissau to show its strength as a regional body. There are three strategies in terms of conflict. You consult, ECOWAS has consulted. You consolidate on that consultation. ECOWAS has done that. That is why the military regime has come out with the December 6, 2026 proposed date for election. But I think it's time for ECOWAS to confront. December date is not a good option. In fact, by November, there will be no decent voice standing in Guinea-Bissau. And by ahead of the December 6th, the military regime will announce a shift in the date. By that time, it would have organized all of the voices remaining, mobilized them corruptly and otherwise, to have a national congress or a national conference like the one we saw in Niger, where everybody will be speaking in favor of the military regime, where the people of Guinea-Bissau will be announcing the military regime as president and that they are okay with him. Force them to accept the regime. By the time they gain sovereignty, ECOWAS would have lost interest or would have lost sovereignty, any morality to intervene.
Austin Abe, Wadr's liaison officer at ECOWAS. While sports begins in Nigeria, where Remo Stars have been sanctioned by the Nigeria Premier League Football League NFL after being found guilty of several violations of league regulations stemming from crowd trouble during their match, the 20 class with Ikorodu City on January 14, 2026. The NPFL, in an official statement, ruled that the Ekene-based side failed to put in place sufficient security arrangements for the fixture, shortcoming that allegedly triggered violent incidents involving supporters of both teams. Elsewhere, Morocco's King Mohammed VI said on Thursday that African fraternity will prevail despite what he described as deplorable incidents that marred the closing moments of the Africa Cup of Nations. This particular refers to the final between Morocco and Senegal. Recall that match was briefly disrupted after Senegalese players protested the VAR award penalty before returning to win 1-0 after extra time. Well, we've come to the end of this edition of Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio Broadcasting from Dakar, Senegal. Thank you for listening, and many thanks to Ismaila Kamara and Maudo Ju for the technical assistance. Do interact with us via our social media platforms, X and Instagram and Facebook at WADR English. I am Sankule Janko. Good afternoon.
And many thanks to you for listening to Newslink via Hot 104.3 FM, Newmi FM 94.0,
Hilltop Radio 104.7 FM,
and Veritas Radio 102.9 in Banjul, the Gambia. We also appreciate our listeners in Liberia via Alternative Youth Radio 98.9 FM, Lofa County,
Radio Kagama 94.5 FM, Niba County, DCN Radio 91.3 FM, Riverside County, Wakat FM Radio, Banga, Liberia, Radio Baf FM 91.3 Sierra Leone in Nigeria, and Love 104.5 FM Abuja.
For you listening via Radio Pad 95.1 Damango, Savannah region, and on Royals FM 104.7 Wenchi, Ghana, we say a big thank you. Remember, West Africa Democracy Radio is all about you, your views, and your opinions.